Welcome to the 1 Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. 1 Nephi, chapter 6. This is a very short chapter, only 6 verses, and it has one single theme, an apologetic for there being no genealogy given for Lehi's family, despite them having gone back to Jerusalem to get the plates with a genealogy, and Nephi even killing his uncle to get them, because it was that important. But we don't have a record of it. In the first verse, Nephi says that he's not going to give the genealogy because he has it in his father's record. That could be understandable, except Nephi is making his own history despite having this exact same time frame in his father's records. Also, Nephi quotes entire chapters of Isaiah, including 12 solid chapters in a row in 2 Nephi, even though he has the entirety of Isaiah on the plates, just like he's got the genealogy of his father and the record of his father. In short, if Nephi actually existed, there was no sense involved in his choices for what he did and didn't include in his records. It only makes sense in light of the Book of Mormon being a fraud and 1 Nephi being a substitute for the missing 116 pages of Lehi's history that the scribe lost. It is the only thing that makes sense. If you're unfamiliar with 116 pages, I have a link included below with more information. But to recap, Joseph Smith had dictated the 116 pages from the plates of Lehi, including the genealogy. But when the pages went missing, he received a revelation from God that he shouldn't retranslate the history of Lehi, but should instead translate the plates of Nephi, which nobody knew even existed until they happened to be needed. So ostensibly, Lehi had his genealogy on the plates from Laban, but still gave his genealogy in his own place, and Nephi had access to both of those copies, both Laban's copy and his father's history. But despite those having his father's history, he needed to write his own history, and despite having the entire book of Isaiah on the plates, he needed to painstakingly engrave chapters upon chapters upon chapters of it into his records. But then said he didn't need to give his genealogy in a separate record because he had his father's genealogy, and that should suffice. This sounds like Joseph Smith had made up a bunch of names for the genealogy of Lehi in the 116 pages, and knew he couldn't recreate them in the same order if he tried to dictate them again, which means that if the lost plates ever resurfaced, he would be proven as a fraud. So he made up this chapter to give the excuse for why he would not have a genealogy in the book. And even verse 6, it says that Nephi would even instruct his children never to include the genealogy. Now, that makes no sense whatsoever if Nephi actually existed, but it makes perfect sense if the Book of Mormon is a fraud. The vagueness in a lot of Nephi is also easily explained by it being the bits and pieces that Joseph Smith could remember from what he had made up of Lehi's record, his history, but that it was said in such a vague way so as not to contradict any details that he might have included in Lehi's history in the 116 pages that he had said originally but had forgotten by the time he was writing Nephi. The other verses, all 6 of them, merely expand upon the same thing of, I'm not going to give my father's genealogy, and I'm going to instruct my kids never to write it either. It's in my father's plates, and even though I'm abridging that I'm not going to include the genealogy, and I'm going to make sure nobody else does either. But I do want to look at these verses as well in a little more detail. Verse 3 is Nephi saying that he's not going to give a full account of what Lehi had written. His stated reason is not because he had Lehi's history on metal plates, so didn't need to recreate it. Nope. He's not including Lehi's record because he needs to have more room to write the things of God. Even though 1 Nephi opens by saying that the book was a record of my proceedings in my days. The next verse sounds oh so pious by saying that his intent is to lead people to God so that they can be saved. And verse 5 is even worse. Quote, Wherefore the things which are pleasing unto the world I do not write, but the things which are pleasing unto God, and unto those who are not of the world. This sounds sort of like the no true Scotsman logical fallacy. If you have a problem with this work, or if what I've written is boring, or you think it's a lie, then that proves that it's really your problem. That proves you're a worldly person. Because if you weren't a worldly person, you would like what I have to say. So there. And then the last verse has Nephi saying he's going to instruct his offspring that they shall not occupy these plates with things that are not of worth unto the children of men. The genealogy isn't of worth to the children of men. It was when it was in Lehi's plates that you recorded 116 pages, but not when it's in your plates. And it was such worth that you went all the way back to Jerusalem and killed somebody for it, but it's not of worth to the children of men. And again, this is kind of the same thing. Everything in this book is of worth unto the children of men. So if you think it's not, then it's your fault, not mine. Of course, it's also worth keeping in mind that everything in these plates, I'm assuming that's the entirety of the Book of Mormon, or at least everything that's ostensibly written by Nephi and his descendants, is supposed to be, quote, of worth, which must include every time it came to pass is used, along with every redundancy employed in the Book of Mormon.